Welcome to today's deep dive. We are just thrilled to have you with us today because the journey we're going on is, well, it's going to fundamentally change the way you read history.
Yeah, it really is a complete paradigm shift.
It totally is. Like, think for a second about picking up a legal document today. Let's say a commercial lease or, an employment contract.
Right.
When you look at that paper, you have this fundamental expectation of precision, right? You expect the words to mean exactly what they say.
Exactly. You're not looking for metaphors.
No. I mean, if you sign a paper that defines you as a tenant, you don't walk away wondering if the landlord now considers you like their literal biological descendant.
Yeah, that would be completely absurd. I mean, the entire system of modern jurisprudence just falls apart if a functional term like tenant suddenly mutates into a description of your DNA.
Right.
The mechanics of the contract demand absolute clarity.
But what if I told you that one of the most massive world-altering shifts in human history happened exactly because that kind of legal clarity was lost in translation?
It's wild to think about.
It really is. And today, we are looking at an incredible stack of research that uncovers this huge historical game of telephone. We've got a 2025 paper from the Harvard Theological Review on ancient Near Eastern treaties, some fascinating research from the African Christian Theology Journal on the 4th century church councils.
That's just brilliant, by the way.
Oh, so good. And we're capping it off with historical texts on Jacobean England from Coote and Nicholson.
Yeah, and when you synthesize these specific sources together, they reveal this single, continuous thread spanning thousands of years.
It's crazy.
It really is. It's just a brilliant look at the mechanics of translation and ultimately power.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to track exactly how original Hebrew legal concepts were completely transformed into Western metaphysical and, well, political ideologies over the countries. We're going to see how words that started as strict legal contracts were literalized, biologicalized, and eventually weaponized to build empires. So, okay, let's unpack this. We really need to establish the baseline of how these words were originally used before everything just shifted.
Yeah, and we find that baseline in the ancient Near East. Drawing heavily here on G. Kugler's 2025 research in the Harvard Theological Review.
Right.
Kugler focuses on the parent-child and, father-son imagery used in ancient biblical texts, like Hosea 11, for instance.
Okay.
Now, for a modern reader living in the West, when we encounter the words father and son in a religious or historical text, we just automatically map our current biological understanding onto those words.
Of course we do. I mean, we immediately think of genetics, family trees, literal reproduction.
Right, because that's the primary function of those words in our everyday language today.
It's hard not to read it that way.
It is, but Kugler's research demonstrates that applying that modern biological lens to the ancient Near East it's entirely anachronistic.
It just doesn't fit.
Not at all. In that ancient context, biblical terms like father and son had absolutely zero to do with biology.
Wow, zero.
None. They were purely legal titles denoting covenant authority and governance. They functioned as the binding language of political and diplomatic treaties.
Right, because the geopolitical landscape back then was dominated by these empires and city-states constantly negotiating power.
Exactly, through what historians call suzerain and vassal treaties.
Right. And looking at the mechanics of those treaties in the research, there's a really helpful way to visualize this for anyone listening. It's very similar to how we use the term lord today in a legal setting.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Yeah, like you walk into a British courtroom and you address the judge as my lord. But by using that title, you're not implying that the judge is some feudal aristocrat who genetically owns your peasant bloodline.
Right. You're not his actual serf.
No. It's an office. It's a title strictly based on their official position, their jurisdiction, and, the authority granted to them by the state.
Yeah, exactly. The authority resides in the robe and the jurisdiction rather than the genetics of the person sitting on the bench.
Exactly.
And in the ancient suzerain vassal system, a supreme ruler, the suzerain, held ultimate geopolitical authority over a vast region.
Okay.
And in the precise language of their legal contracts, this supreme ruler took the title of father.
Ah, okay. So if the supreme ruler operates as the father, then the subordinate kings managing the local territories would take the title of sons.
You got it. And becoming a son in this context required a formal legal mechanism. The supreme ruler would legally adopt a subordinate ruler into that son status.
Wow.
Yeah, it was known in ancient diplomacy as creating a divine vassal.
But this isn't like a domestic arrangement.
No, not at all. It was a rigorous diplomatic protocol designed to affirm legal governance. It established a binding chain of command.
So it's heavily contractual.
Highly specific. The father provides military protection and delegates authority, while the son provides absolute loyalty, pays tribute, and enforces the father's specific laws within their local territory.
That is it's mind-blowing because the foundation of these texts is entirely functional. The way these ancient people articulated their relationship to authority and even to the divine was built on binding legal agreements.
Right.
When you read the original texts with that framework, it completely changes the scenery. It's no longer a domestic family drama. It's a courtroom.
Exactly.
It's a geopolitical treaty being actively negotiated with clear stipulations for what happens if the contract is breached.
And understanding that purely legal functional mechanism is absolutely critical here. We have a rock-solid contractual framework operating in the ancient Near East.
Okay.
But the disruption occurs centuries later. When these texts and concepts are pulled out of their original ancient Hebrew context and transplanted into the Greco-Roman world.
Okay, so that transition raises a massive structural question.
Yeah.
If these terms operated with the precision of a legal contract, how on earth does a diplomatic treaty mutate into a debate over literal biological descent?
Well, what's fascinating here is how profoundly a culture's worldview dictates its comprehension of translated texts. We're relying here on J.R. Barron's 2025 research on African Christian theology, which provides this extensive look at the 4th century church councils, most notably Nicaea.
Right.
In this era, Western theologians were faced with this totally daunting task. They had to explain Jesus, a Hebrew Messiah, whose entire identity was rooted in this ancient legal covenant tradition, to a pagan Greco-Roman audience.
An audience that possesses a radically different framework for how the universe even operates.
Completely different.
They aren't thinking in terms of conditional treaties or legal covenant enforcement at all.
No, the Greco-Roman imagination was deeply saturated in Greek metaphysics and, the mythology of literal demigods.
Right, like Hercules.
Exactly. Hercules, Perseus beings who are half god and half human through literal genetic descent. Their gods did not make conditional legal contracts with humans. They physically reproduced with them.
Wow. Okay, so when a Roman citizen in the 4th century hears the phrase son of God, they're not picturing a subordinate vassal king faithfully executing the laws of a supreme suzerain.
No, not at all.
They're picturing Zeus coming down from Mount Olympus to physically sire an offspring.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the 4th century church councils lean heavily into that existing philosophical framework.
Really?
Yeah. Barron's research highlights how these councils actively traded the original Hebrew language of covenant authority for Greek philosophical categories.
Okay.
So instead of discussing the legal faithfulness of the Messiah to the covenant, they began debating God's physical substance.
Substance.
Yeah. The Greek term they obsessed over was ousia. They were attempting to define the exact metaphysical, biological makeup of the divine.
Wow.
And in doing so, they took a legal, functional office and converted it into literal divine ancestry.
Okay, wait, hold on. I have to push back here for a second.
Sure.
Because the sources present a massive theological roadblock to this idea.
Okay, let's hear it.
If we're arguing that this Greco-Roman shift turned a legal title into a discussion of literal divine biology, we run straight into a brick wall with Hebrew law.
Right.
The Jewish Messiah was functioning within the strict parameters of the Torah, and he would never command his followers to violate those laws. And Leviticus 17.14 is completely uncompromising.
Very true.
It strictly forbids the consumption of blood, warning that anyone who does will be entirely cut off from the community.
Right.
So if the original context was a Hebrew legal covenant, how does the central practice of the early followers, the remembrance meal, become entirely focused on drinking literal blood?
That is a profound tension, and honestly, it was a significant point of friction for early Jewish followers.
It had to be.
Yeah. To a first-century Hebrew operating under covenant law, the concept of consuming literal blood wasn't just unappealing, it was a severe violation of the legal contract they had with God.
Exactly. The blood represented the life which belongs solely to the Creator.
Right. But to understand how the shift occurred, we have to look away from the Hebrew law and examine the mechanics of the pagan rituals that the Greeks and Romans were already practicing.
Ah, okay. Because the mystery cults were already deeply established in that region long before these texts even arrived.
Exactly. They were the dominant spiritual experience for many. The pagan Greeks engaged in a practice known as theophagy.
Which translates literally to God-eating.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the cult of Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy, followers participated in highly charged rituals where they drank wine, operating under the belief that it was the literal blood of their deity.
Oh, wow.
And the mechanism of this ritual was purely metaphysical. The underlying logic was that by consuming the literal blood of the god, you physically absorbed his immortality.
You're taking it into your body.
Right. You ingested his divine substance as age now. It was a biological transfer of power.
So they are not participating in a meal as a symbol of a renewed legal contract.
No.
They are attempting to physically ingest the attributes of the deity.
Exactly. So when Roman theology began to institutionalize, it synthesized this existing mystery cult ritual with the imported Hebrew texts.
Wow.
The pagan audience already held a deep-seated belief that accessing divine power required eating the god.
Okay.
So the Western theologians, having already literalized the covenant title of son into biological ancestry through those Ugia debates, they just mapped the Dionysian concept of theophagy directly onto the Hebrew remembrance meal.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because when you place Kugler's research on ancient treaties next to Barron's research on the 4th century councils, the structural inversion is staggering.
It's massive.
Roman theology took a Hebrew Messiah and transformed his legal office of kingly authority into a biological lineage.
Yes.
They took the concept of covenant sacrifice and filtered it through a lens of pagan blood appeasement. And they took a contractual remembrance meal and mutated it into a pagan god-eating ritual.
Yeah, the original functional meaning of the text was almost entirely overwritten by a Greek metaphysical operating system.
That's a great way to put it.
And the tragedy here is that the Western Church traded a profound system of legal diplomatic governance for a system reliant on basically magical biology and physical substance.
Right.
But the consequences of shifting a concept from legal to biological didn't remain trapped in ancient theological debates. That specific mutation became the architectural foundation for global political power.
Which moves our timeline forward, right?
Yeah.
From the councils of ancient Rome to the political theater of 17th century England.
Yes, exactly.
Because if theology is literalized into a biological bloodline, someone is going to figure out how to weaponize that translation for political gain.
Oh, absolutely. And for that, we turn to the historical text by Coote from 2011 and Nicholson from 2003, analyzing the ideology of Jacobean England and the making of the 1611 King James Bible.
Okay, so we're looking at King James I of England.
Right. And to understand the decisions James made, you really must understand the precarious nature of his power.
It wasn't exactly stable.
No. His entire claim to the throne, his right to hold absolute authority over millions of people, rested entirely on his biological descent.
Okay, so the analogy of a modern CEO conducting a hostile takeover doesn't even quite capture the scale of what James did here.
No, it's way bigger.
It's closer to a monarch realizing his power is fragile, so he decides to rewrite the fundamental constitution of the universe,
Yes.
claiming that the cosmos itself demands absolute obedience to his specific genetic line.
That is exactly what he did.
And to pull off that level of ideological control, he uses a centuries-old Greco-Roman mistranslation to provide the legal backing.
Because James was acutely aware of the danger of the original Hebrew concept.
Right.
Think about it. If political and divine authority operates merely as a legal contract like the ancient suzerain treaties, well, contracts have conditional terms.
They can be broken.
Exactly. If a ruler breaches the stipulations of the covenant, the people possess a valid legal justification to remove him from power.
Which is terrifying for a king.
Very. But if authority is a biological trait, established by a biologically literalized God, then that authority is absolute and unquestionable. You can debate the terms of a contract, but you cannot debate DNA.
Wow. But the challenge for James was that he couldn't just decree this biological supremacy, right? He had to weave it into the fabric of daily life. He had to institutionalize it through language.
And he achieved this through the meticulous management of the 1611 Bible translation.
Ah.
The research by Coote and Nicholson illustrates that this was far from a purely scholarly endeavor. It was a highly regulated political project.
Right, he was pulling the strings.
Absolutely. King James strictly controlled the translation rules provided to the scholars. He mandated that the English vocabulary be slanted to reinforce absolute top-down rule and strict bloodline hierarchy.
He needed the translated text to mirror and validate his own precarious political structure.
Exactly.
And the sources detail the specific rules he imposed, and the mechanics of his censorship are just fascinating. Like, he placed an absolute ban on any anti-monarchical margin notes.
Because those margin notes were his biggest threat.
Really?
Yeah. Prior to 1611, The most popular English translation was the Geneva Bible, and it was heavily annotated by Protestant reformers.
Okay.
Those margin notes frequently applied a functional covenantal lens to the text. For instance, if a biblical king acted tyrannically, the Geneva Notes would explicitly argue that the king had broken his covenant with God, and therefore the populace was no longer legally obligated to obey him.
Oh my gosh. That is essentially the ancient Near Eastern legal framework surviving in the margins.
Yes.
It treats the relationship between ruler and ruled as a conditional agreement.
Exactly. And King James viewed those margin notes as a direct existential threat to his life and his dynasty.
I bet.
So when he commissioned the 1611 translation, his primary directive was the total elimination of any margin notes that challenged the absolute authority of the monarchy.
Wow.
He systematically stripped away the legal covenantal interpretation and forced the linguistic mechanics of the text to support his personal doctrine.
The divine right of kings.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the King James translation represents the ultimate political weaponization of that centuries-long game of telephone.
It's incredible.
James utilized a literalized biological theology to legally enforce the divine right of kings.
Yeah.
European rulers deliberately capitalized on the concept of a bloodline god, a concept born entirely from a Greek misunderstanding of a Hebrew legal term to justify, expand, and maintain vast, oppressive political empires.
Right.
They took a metaphysical mistranslation and built the modern monarchical world directly on top of it.
So what does this all mean? We started in the sands of the ancient Near East, where father and son functioned as binding legal titles and sophisticated diplomatic treaties.
Right.
We watched as 4th century church councils, desperate to communicate with a pagan audience, stripped away that legal precision. They replaced it with Greek metaphysics, converting a legal office into literal divine DNA and absorbing pagan god-eating rituals into their core practices. And finally, we saw King James I take that mistranslated biological theology and lock it into the English language. He fundamentally altered the vocabulary of his empire to protect his own throne, cementing a top-down hierarchy that ruled Europe for centuries.
It's astounding.
It is a massive, almost incomprehensible disconnect between the original Hebrew context and the Western interpretations we inherited.
It is a profound historical rupture. And for you listening, grasping the mechanics of this historical trajectory offers immense practical value today.
Totally.
We live in an era characterized by relentless information overload. Understanding precisely how language is manipulated across time and cultures is the ultimate tool for critical thinking.
Right.
It forces us to recognize that the traditions we often accept as fixed, unshakable truths from the dawn of time are frequently the result of deliberate political maneuvers hidden in plain sight.
It fundamentally changes how you interrogate the texts and traditions handed down to you.
Absolutely.
Which leaves us with one final thought for you to mull over today as you navigate your own world. We've just traced how easily meaning can be inverted. If words as foundational, as intimate, and as seemingly obvious as father and son could be literally redefined over centuries to build empires and completely alter global theology, what foundational words in our modern legal, political, or social systems are currently being subtly redefined right under our noses to justify the power structures of tomorrow?
It is a question that demands our constant attention.
It really is. Well, that's our deep dive for today. Keep questioning the words you read.